My name is Lauren Blake, and the night I held that winning ticket in my hand, it felt like the air was stolen from the room. 6 numbers glowed on my phone screen, each one matching perfectly, like fate had been holding its breath just for me. $46 million. I should have been screaming, running through the streets, calling everyone I knew. Instead, I just sat there in my tiny apartment, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. Because I knew without a single doubt that I wouldn't tell a soul. You might think that sounds crazy. You might be wondering how anyone could keep something like this to themselves. But you don't know my family. I grew up learning that money wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon, a bargaining chip, a way to keep score. And I had been on the losing end of that score for as long as I could remember. Every loan I'd given, every favor I'd extended, ended with me emptier than before, financially and emotionally. So there I was, sitting at my kitchen table under the harsh hum of the fluorescent light, staring at a piece of paper that could change everything. And my first instinct wasn't celebration, it was protection. I didn't imagine yachts or mansions. I imagined phone calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I imagined my father's condescending advice wrapped in demands. My sister's tight smile while calculating exactly how much of my windfall she could borrow. My brother's promises to pay me back as soon as things pick up. I imagined my stepmother's thinly veiled judgments, my uncle's fake charm, my cousin's sudden warmth after years of cold distance. And in that moment I decided they wouldn't get the chance. I'd claim the money quietly. I'd work with professionals who knew how to keep a secret. And I'd keep living like Lauren Blake, the underpaid project coordinator who drove an aging Ford Escape and hunted for coupons online, not Lauren Blake, the multimillionaire target. But even as I sat there making mental plans, I felt the first flicker of something dangerous: curiosity. What if I could truly know who cared about me without the promise of a payday? What if I could test it? Would it be wrong, or would it finally set me free from years of doubt? Before I tell you what happened next, I have to ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I've got a feeling this story might change the way you look at the people closest to you. Because for me, this was the night the real game began. And the prize wasn't the millions in my bank account, it was the truth. I grew up in a family where love always seemed to come with an invoice. My earliest memories of home are cluttered with the sound of arguments about bills, whispered conversations about who owes who, and the heavy silence that followed when someone didn't pay up. My parents split when I was 13, and if you think divorce made things simpler, you'd be wrong. It just created 2 smaller kingdoms with separate rulers, each demanding loyalty, each keeping their own ledger. My father, a high school chemistry teacher, remarried a woman named Evelyn, who had the kind of taste you only see in glossy magazines: sleek kitchen remodels every 3 years, spa retreats in the mountains, closets full of handbags that cost more than my car. She smiled sweetly in public, but had a knack for reminding me I was lucky to be included in any family gathering at all. My mother, on the other hand, married Tom, a retired businessman who made a fortune in construction, but was as tight-fisted as a locked vault. He could drop 10 grand on a new grill, but would give you a 20 and call it a loan. Then there was my younger sister Emily, the golden child. Ivy League degree, a surgeon husband, a perfect suburban home with a wraparound porch, and 2 equally perfect kids. Her life was a Pinterest board come to life, and I was always the cautionary tale in the background. My older brother Kyle was the opposite: charming, unreliable, and perpetually between jobs. He'd perfected the art of borrowing money with tearful promises, only to ghost until the next crisis. Outside the immediate circle were the extended cast Aunt Marjorie, who measured her self-worth in the size of her diamonds, and her son Brad, who inherited her entitlement but none of her wealth. And then there was Aunt June, my mother's younger sister, living paycheck to paycheck as a school librarian, driving a decade-old sedan that rattled like it was full of loose change. June never had much, but she was the only one who'd ever shown up without asking for something in return. I wish I could say my suspicions about my family's priorities came from paranoia, but the receipts were endless. 2 years ago, Kyle called crying, saying he needed $6,000 for rehab. I emptied my savings, desperate to believe he was finally ready to turn things around. 3 months later, I found out he'd never checked in. He'd taken a road trip to Vegas instead. Emily once asked me to put $2,500 on my credit card for unexpected wedding expenses. That was 5 years ago, and every time I hinted at repayment, she'd act like I was bringing up ancient history. My father once needed a loan to fix his leaky roof. I sent what I could, then a month later saw vacation photos of him and Evelyn sipping cocktails in Aruba. So when I looked at that winning ticket, my mind didn't just flash to dreams of financial freedom. It replayed every betrayal, every unanswered call, every time I'd been the safety net with no one to catch me. The conclusion was unavoidable. Telling them about this money would be like setting myself on fire and handing them marshmallows. And yet, something in me wanted proof. Proof that my cynicism wasn't misplaced. Proof that there was someone in that tangled web of blood relations who cared for me, not my wallet. That thought, that dangerous little itch, was the seed of what I was about to do. But before I dive deeper, I have to tell you, if you've ever been burned by someone you thought you could trust, hit that subscribe button and share your story in the comments. These conversations matter, because sometimes the only way to truly understand a person's character is to see how they act when there's nothing in it for them. This secret wasn't just about keeping my money safe, it was about keeping my dignity. And to do that, I was about to create the most believable lie of my life. A story so real they'd feel my desperation. A test they didn't know they were taking. The results, well, let's just say they would define the rest of my life. If you really want to understand why I decided to keep my lottery win a secret, you need to hear about the history that built my distrust brick by brick. Every time I tried to be the dependable one, the good one, it cost me, and not just in dollars. Let's start with Kyle. My charming, unreliable brother could talk his way into a bank vault if he had to, and in my case, the vault was me. 2 years ago, I got a call from him at midnight. His voice was ragged shaking, said he'd hit rock bottom and needed to get into rehab right away. $6,000. You're the only one I can trust, he said. I'll pay you back in full once I'm clean. I drained my savings, watched the money leave my account faster than I could take a breath. 3 months later, I learned he never set foot in a treatment facility. Instead, he'd gone on a road trip with friends, blowing the cash in casinos and bars from Reno to Vegas. When I confronted him, he laughed it off like it was no big deal. Come on, Lauren, it's not like you can't make more money. Then there was Emily. She didn't ask for help often, but when she did, it came wrapped in silk and tied with a bow. During her wedding planning, she called me, her voice tight with emergency urgency. $500 needed for last-minute venue upgrades. I put it on my credit card, thinking I was helping her have her dream day. That was 5 years ago. Every time I've brought it up, she waves her hand like she's shooing away a fly. Lauren, it's been forever. We're family. Do we really need to keep track like that? My dad. He once called about his roof leaking after a storm. Said repairs were urgent, that the insurance payout wouldn't come for months. I scraped together $1,000 to help. 4 weeks later, I saw photos of him and Evelyn grinning on a white sand beach in Aruba, drinks in hand, no sign of stress. Even outside my immediate family, the pattern repeated. Aunt Marjorie once claimed she needed a short-term loan to cover some expenses until a property sale went through. That sale never happened, and my calls went unanswered. Cousin Brad hit me up for a can't-miss investment opportunity in a sports betting pool. You can guess how that ended. He ghosted the minute the pool collapsed. But the one that cut deepest, it was the year my car broke down, right after I'd helped Kyle with his so-called rehab money. I was stranded juggling ride shares just to get to work. I asked my father for a short-term loan, just $500 until payday. He told me it wasn't wise to lend money to someone in financial distress. I remember hanging up the phone, sitting in the corner of my apartment, and realizing that my family's idea of support was a one-way street, and I was always the road. These weren't isolated events. They were a pattern, each one a fresh reminder that when it came to money, I was everyone's safety net but no one's priority. So when I stared at that lottery ticket, the memory of all those moments came rushing back, like someone had hit play on a highlight reel of every betrayal. And it cemented the truth. If they knew about this money, it wouldn't be a blessing. It would be open season on my bank account. But here's the thing. As much as I was angry, I was also curious. Had I really been wrong about everyone? Was there no one in my family who'd stand by me without something in it for them? That question became the fuel for what I was about to do next. And I want to pause here to ask, have you ever had someone take advantage of your kindness? Tell me in the comments. Because I think you'll understand why I decided the only way to find out the truth was to set a trap. Not a cruel one, not one meant to humiliate, but a scenario so real they'd have to decide help me when I had nothing to offer or walk away. What I didn't know then was how quickly that answer would come, and how much it would hurt to hear it. The morning after my numbers hit, I didn't go to work. For the first time in years, I called in sick, not because I was sick, but because the ground under my feet had shifted, and I needed to get my bearings before anyone noticed. My old Ford Escape sat in the driveway, dew still clinging to the windshield, while I paced my tiny kitchen with the winning ticket sealed in a sandwich bag inside my purse like it was radioactive. I knew the first step wasn't spending a dime, it was protection. And I wasn't just talking about protecting the money. I was protecting my privacy, my sanity, my future. The stories I'd read the night before were still rattling in my head. Lottery winners bankrupt in 5 years, families imploding, friends turning into enemies. Money didn't just solve problems, it created brand new ones. By noon, I was downtown standing in the sleek marble lobby of a law firm I'd found after hours of online research. The plaque on the wall read Foster and Grant Estate Law and Financial Planning. I'd chosen them because they specialized in anonymity for lottery winners. When I was finally ushered into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a warm but cautious smile extended his hand. "Ms. Blake, I'm Daniel Foster. What can I do for you today?" I set the bag ticket on his desk like it was evidence in a criminal case. I need to claim this without anyone finding out it's me. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his professional demeanor locked back into place. "I see. Well, you came to the right place." For the next 2 hours, Daniel walked me through the process, setting up a blind trust, claiming the winnings through that trust, so my name wouldn't appear on any public record, hiring a vetted financial advisor, and creating a plan that would keep the bulk of my money working for me, rather than sitting in a bank account tempting me or anyone else to spend recklessly. "The biggest mistake winners make," he said, sliding a stack of documents toward me, "is telling too many people too quickly. Once the word is out, you can't pull it back in." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I'm not telling anyone, not yet." We built a layered plan, diversified investments, an emergency account that wouldn't raise suspicion, and a clear roadmap for the next 12 months. We even discussed how to keep my day-to-day life looking exactly the same, right down to the modest rent payments and the beat-up Ford. "You could walk away from your job tomorrow," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair, "but I recommend you don't. Sudden lifestyle changes attract attention." "I'll keep working," I replied, even though the thought of going back to my office and listening to my boss take credit for my work made my stomach turn, at least for now. When I left the firm, the sun was setting, casting long shadows down Main Street. My head was buzzing, not from fear anymore, but from the strange mix of power and responsibility sitting in my bank account hidden under layers of legal armor. That night, sitting in my apartment, I thought about my next move. I could keep going through the motions, pretend life was the same, and quietly enjoy my security. Or I could use this moment to answer the question that had been burning in me for years: who in my family would be there if I had nothing? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew how to get one. And before I tell you about the plan I came up with, I want to ask, if you suddenly came into life-changing money, would you tell your family? Share your thoughts below. This isn't a hypothetical as far as I'm concerned, it's survival. The truth was coming one way or another, and I was going to be the one to pull back the curtain. The idea didn't come all at once. It crept in like a whisper I didn't want to hear, half daring, half warning. I'd spent years suspecting the truth about my family, and now I had the means to test it without risking what I'd just secured. One night after another long day of pretending to care about quarterly reports, I sat on my couch with a glass of cheap wine, staring at the city lights beyond my window. My mind replayed every unanswered call, every borrowed dollar that never came back, every time someone I loved had made my needs secondary to their own convenience. And that whisper got louder. What if I could know, really know, who would stand beside me if I had nothing to offer? What if I could design the perfect scenario to strip away the excuses, the polite dodges, the "I wish I could help" lines? That's when it clicked. I wouldn't just wait for life to test them, I'd create the test myself. The story had to be believable. Too dramatic, and it would invite gossip. Too vague, and it wouldn't pull at their sense of urgency. I started sketching it out in my notebook. I'd tell them my company suddenly went under after a major client defaulted. The collapse had been so abrupt that I was still owed my final paycheck. To make things worse, I'd had recent medical tests for some concerning symptoms, draining the last of my emergency fund. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and without help, I'd be in danger of losing my apartment. The number I'd asked for was $5,000, not impossible for most of them, but enough to make them pause. It wasn't pocket change, it was a choice. As I wrote, I felt a pang of guilt. Manipulating people wasn't in my nature. But then I thought about the times I'd given without hesitation, without asking for collateral or proof, simply because they were my family. And I realized this wasn't about manipulation, it was about clarity. I needed to know who they were when there was nothing to gain. That night, I called my friend Hannah, the one person outside my lawyer I trusted implicitly. I told her about the plan. She frowned, swirling her tea. "Lauren, it's risky," she said. "You might hear things you're not ready to hear." "I've already heard them," I replied quietly. "I just want them to be honest about it this time." She sighed. "Then make sure your story's airtight. They'll poke at it, especially the ones who don't want to help." We spent hours fine-tuning the details, what the company's name was, how long I'd been without income, what treatments I'd supposedly had, even the kind of medical bills I'd reference. By the end of it, the lie felt disturbingly real. Before I reached for my phone to start making calls, I wrote down my predictions. I already knew deep down how each person would react. But I wanted the record something to hold myself accountable when the emotions started clouding my judgment. And here's where I want to turn this to you. If you were in my position, would you run this kind of test on your own family? Drop your answer in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious if people think this is crossing a line or just pulling back a curtain that's already see-through. I closed my notebook, feeling the mix of anticipation and dread settling deep in my chest. This was no longer just an idea. The trap was set. Tomorrow I'd start with the people who claimed to love me most, and I'd find out if that love could survive when the only thing I was offering was myself. I woke up the next morning with the plan still buzzing in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. The sun wasn't even up yet, but I was already at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my notebook open, and a pen poised over a fresh page. At the top I wrote test list. I knew exactly who would be on it. 10 names each tied to a history of asking, taking, or conveniently forgetting the help I'd given them. Some were predictable. Others I wanted so badly to believe might surprise me. First was my mother, Diane. Growing up, she loved to remind us how much she'd sacrificed for her kids, how she'd put her dreams aside for our sake. But since marrying Tom, I'd noticed her generosity had a price tag, and the bill usually went to someone else. She'd probably express concern, maybe even some sympathy, but I doubted she'd hand over $5,000. Then came Tom, my stepfather. His philosophy was simple. If it's not directly benefiting me, it's not worth the money. He'd smile, pat my hand, and tell me this would build character. My father, Robert, was next. Logical to a fault, he'd turned this into a lecture on financial planning, complete with a reminder that I should have 6 months of expenses saved up. I could almost hear him now. "You can't expect others to fix your poor planning, Lauren." Evelyn, my stepmother, wouldn't even pretend. Her brand of honesty was blunt to the point of cruelty. If she gave me anything, it would be unsolicited advice on downsizing and maybe a book about budgeting wrapped in a bow. Then there was Emily, my sister, and her husband, Peter. They had more than enough, but their money was always tied up in home renovations, luxury vacations, or private school tuition for the kids. Emily would tilt her head in mock sympathy, but the words, "We just can't, right now," would follow. Kyle, my brother, was easy to predict. He'd say he was broke, probably in the middle of a bad month, and promise to help when things pick up, which in his world meant never. The extended family filled out the rest of the list. Aunt Marjorie, with her diamond-studded disdain, would likely use my situation as an example of poor life choices. Cousin Brad might promise to figure something out, but vanish as soon as I asked when. And then Aunt June, she was the wild card. She had the least to give, but I'd seen her share her last $20 with a neighbor in need. She'd never once asked me for money, never dangled help in exchange for a favor. She might not have $5,000, but if she offered even a fraction, it would be more than anyone else. When the list was done, I sat back and stared at it. 10 names. 10 people who would be getting the exact same story word for word. I wanted this to be fair, controlled. I wasn't looking for loopholes or excuses. I wanted to see if anyone would step up when I had nothing to offer in return. But even as I told myself this was about honesty, a part of me knew it was about more than that. It was about closure, about confirming what I'd suspected for years, so I could stop wondering, stop hoping, and finally move forward without the constant weight of maybe they care hanging over me. I closed the notebook, slid it into my bag, and glanced at my phone. The first call would be my mother. It made sense to start there with the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Before I tell you how that went, I want to hear from you. If you made a list like mine, who would be your wild card? Who's the one person you think might surprise you for better or worse? Share it in the comments. Because once I started dialing, I realized something. This wasn't just a test for them, it was a test for me too. And I was about to find out if I was ready for the answers. I dialed my mother's number first, the list open in front of me like a battle plan. My thumb hovered over the call button longer than I'd admit. Part of me wanted to slam the notebook shut and pretend this whole idea had been nothing more than a late-night thought experiment. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It makes cowards into gamblers. And I was all in. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright but distracted. "Lauren, I was just heading out the door. What's up?" I put the strain in my voice, the hesitation I'd rehearsed with Hannah. "Hey, Mom. Listen, I didn't want to call you with this, but I'm in a bind. The company went under completely out of the blue. No paycheck, nothing. And to make things worse, I've had some medical tests lately. I've drained my emergency fund. I'm behind on rent. I need help. About $5,000 just to keep me afloat until I can land somewhere else." There was a pause, a long one. Then, "Oh, honey, that's awful. But $5,000 is a lot right now. You know, Tom and I just redid the patio and replaced the deck furniture. We're kind of cash poor at the moment." I could hear her shuffling papers, her attention already drifting. "Have you asked your dad? Or maybe Emily? They're in a better position than we are." I was hoping not to. "Well, let me talk to Tom, see if there's anything we can manage. No promises, okay?" No promises. I wrote it down exactly like that in my notebook. Next up was my father. I met him for coffee, thinking maybe face-to-face would keep him from brushing me off. I told him the same story. He nodded along, his expression more like a disappointed professor than a concerned parent. "Lauren, you know I've always told you to have 6 months savings for emergencies." His voice slid into lecture mode. "You can't expect others to bail you out when you don't plan ahead." I didn't expect. And now Evelyn and I are focusing on our retirement. It would be irresponsible to pull from those funds. 20 minutes later, I walked out of that cafe with nothing but a paper cup of lukewarm coffee and another note in my journal. No offer. Lecture only. Emily was next. I drove to her immaculate suburban home, sat at her marble kitchen island, and laid out the story. She gasped, reached for my hand, her eyes wide with sympathy. "Oh my God, Lauren, that's terrible, but $5,000 is a lot. We just booked the Mediterranean cruise and the kids' tuition is due." She promised to talk to Peter and see if they could help with a smaller amount, maybe even offer their guest room if I needed to move in. It sounded generous until she added, "Of course we'd have to clear out all the storage boxes first." My brother Kyle didn't bother with sympathy. He responded to my text with a single line, "That sucks, sis. Tight month for me too. I'll call you later." He didn't. Evelyn, my stepmother, was brisk and unapologetic. "Lauren, I'm sure this is stressful, but $5,000 is a lot of money. You might consider getting a roommate or moving somewhere cheaper." Aunt Marjorie's voice over the phone was drenched in disapproval. "I always said that company seemed unstable. Maybe this is the universe telling you to make better choices." Brad was initially enthusiastic, saying he'd figure something out and meet me for lunch with a check. He canceled an hour before promising to reschedule. He didn't. By the end of the week, I'd made 8 calls, 8 variations of no or I wish I could. Each one chipped away at something I'd already known but hadn't wanted to name. And here's where I'll ask you, if 8 out of 10 people you'd helped in the past turned you down when you needed them, would you keep calling or would you stop? Drop your answer below, because the last 2 calls, they were about to change everything. One would be exactly what I expected. The other would be the one person who didn't just pass the test, they rewrote it entirely. By Friday evening, the list was almost complete. 8 names crossed off, 8 variations of polite refusals, excuses wrapped in sympathy, or offers so hollow they practically echoed. My notebook sat open on the coffee table, each no underlined in red. I poured myself a glass of water and told myself I'd make the last 2 calls tomorrow. That's when my phone lit up. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Aunt June. I hadn't even reached out to her yet. She was supposed to be the final call, my wild card. but here she was calling me first. "Lauren, honey," she said. As soon as I picked up her voice warm and steady, "I just heard from your mom that you lost your job. Are you okay?" The concern in her tone was different from the others. It wasn't laced with judgment or that faint irritation I'd heard all week. It was genuine. I felt my throat tighten. "I'm hanging in there," I said, and for the first time since this whole thing started, the emotion in my voice was real. "Listen," she continued, "I want to help. Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow? My treat." We agreed on a little diner near her apartment, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a chalkboard menu. When I walked in the next day, she was already there wearing her usual jeans and a cardigan with mismatched buttons. She stood to hug me tight like she meant it. Over sandwiches and coffee, she asked about my job search, my health, my landlord. She didn't rush, didn't check her phone. She listened, really listened. And then after the plates were cleared, she reached into her bag and slid a plain white envelope across the table. "I want you to take this," she said. "It's $3,000. I know it's not the full amount you need, but it should help with the rent at least." I stared at it. "June, I can't. This is too much." "Nonsense," she said, her tone firm but kind. "Family helps family. And listen, if it comes to it, my couch folds out into a bed. It's not fancy, but you'd be welcome as long as you need to stay." For a moment, the noise of the diner faded. It was just me and her sitting across that scratched table, the envelope between us. She had so little, and yet she was offering almost everything she had. My eyes stung. "Thank you." I whispered the words heavier than they should have been. She smiled. "Don't you worry about paying it back right away. Get yourself steady first, and next time find a job that treats you right. Life's too short to be miserable at work." Driving home, the envelope sat on the passenger seat, like a symbol of kindness, of loyalty, of what real family is supposed to look like. I knew her finances weren't great. She'd told me in passing about her type 2 diabetes, about the cost of her medication going up. I'd noticed the wear on her car, the way she clipped grocery coupons. Later, I did some quiet digging and learned the truth that $3,000 represented almost all her savings. She'd been picking up extra tutoring shifts just to cover her bills. And yet she hadn't hesitated. That knowledge hit me harder than any no I'd heard that week. Because here was the truth laid bare. June had given me almost everything she had, without expectation, without conditions. Meanwhile, others in my family had more than enough and still couldn't part with a fraction of it. It was humbling, and it was infuriating. And it made me realize something else: my experiment wasn't over. Not until I told June the truth. But first, I needed to sit with this moment to remember exactly how it felt when someone proved without a doubt that you mattered more than money. Before I tell you what happened when I came clean to her, I want to ask, if someone with the least to give offered you almost everything they had, how would you repay them? Because for me, that question was about to define the rest of my life. I didn't sleep much that night. The envelope from June sat on my dresser, the flap still sealed like it was watching me. Every time I looked at it, I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude because she had given without hesitation. Guilt because her kindness had been met with a lie. By morning, I knew I couldn't leave it like this. She deserved the truth, not just about my job, but about everything. I drove to her apartment the next evening with a bag of takeout and a bottle of her favorite sweet tea. She answered the door in her slippers, her hair pulled back, smiling like I'd just made her week by showing up. We settled on her couch plates, balanced on our laps. The television murmured quietly in the background. "June," I began, "there's something I need to tell you." She gave me a curious look, but didn't interrupt. "I didn't lose my job," I said, the words tumbling out faster now. "The company's fine. I still work there." Her brows knit together. "Then why?" "I made it up. All of it. I wanted to see who in the family would help me if I had nothing to give back." I know it sounds manipulative, but after years of everything, I needed to know the truth. For a long moment, she just sat there, her expression unreadable. Finally, she set her plate on the coffee table. "I'm not angry," she said quietly. "Sad, maybe. Sad that you felt you had to test people like that. But I get it. Our family hasn't always treated you right." I swallowed. "You were the only one who offered anything, and you have the least to spare." She gave me a small, wry smile. "People show you who they are when giving becomes inconvenient. That's when you know if their love is real." Her words hit like a stone dropped into deep water. Then she leaned back, a shadow crossing her face. "Did I ever tell you why I left, Robert?" she asked. I shook my head. She told me about the inheritance she'd received from her grandmother, $40,000, not life-changing, but enough to be a safety net. Her ex-husband had pressured her to invest it in his friend's can't-miss business idea. She'd refused. A month later, she found out he'd forged her signature and drained the account. The business failed within a year, and the marriage fell apart shortly after. That's when I learned money doesn't change people, it just shows you who they really are. She looked at me, her gaze steady. And it can change you too if you're not careful. I felt the words settle into me like they belonged there. There's something else, I said, taking a breath. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery, $46 million. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp, didn't pepper me with questions. She just waited. I haven't told anyone else. Not Mom, not Dad, not Emily or Kyle. You're the first to know. I needed to find out who I could trust before I decided what to do with it. June reached over, resting her hand on mine. Lauren, you don't owe anyone anything, not even me. But if you want my advice, don't let this money change who you are. And don't let it buy people's love. If they wouldn't show up for you before, they won't truly be there after. I nodded, feeling the knot in my chest loosen just a little. That night, I left her apartment with a new sense of clarity. My experiment had given me one undeniable answer. The list of people who deserved to be part of my future was much shorter than I'd once thought. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more move to make, one that would show my entire family exactly where we stood without revealing a single dollar of the truth. And trust me, they weren't going to see it coming. Driving home from June's, I kept replaying her words. Don't let this money change who you are. They weren't a warning, they were a lifeline. Because the truth was, part of me was already changing. I'd been so focused on protecting myself that I'd started to see everyone as a potential threat, every interaction as a transaction waiting to happen. But June, she reminded me there were still people who gave without expecting anything back. And that kind of loyalty deserved more than a thank you card and a returned envelope. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had a plan. It wasn't just about rewarding her, it was about making sure she never had to choose between buying groceries and paying for her medication again. The next morning, I called Daniel Foster, my lawyer. I want to set up a private trust, I told him, for my aunt. Something that will send her a steady monthly payment for life no matter what. Daniel was quiet for a second. Lauren, that's a beautiful thing to do. How much are you thinking? $5,000 a month, I said without hesitation. Enough for her to live comfortably, travel if she wants, and never have to worry again. We spent the next hour ironing out the details: anonymous deposits, a structure that wouldn't raise red flags with the IRS, and a clause that allowed me to increase the payments anytime I wanted. That afternoon, I drove to June's place again. She answered the door in her gardening gloves, dirt smudged across her cheek. Lauren, you're back twice in 1 week. I must be special. You are, I said, handing her a small gift bag. Inside was a hand-painted mug that said "Best Aunt Ever" in looping script. She laughed. This is adorable. But you didn't drive all the way here just for this, did you? No, I admitted. I came to tell you I'm paying you back, with interest. Starting next month, you'll get a deposit in your account. $5,000, every month, forever. Her hands stilled around the mug. Lauren, that's too much. I can't accept that. You can and you will, I said, smiling but firm. Because you didn't hesitate to give me almost everything you had when you thought I had nothing. And because you're the only one who's ever shown me what family really means. For the first time since I'd known her, June's eyes filled with tears. She set the mug down carefully, then pulled me into a hug so tight I could feel her heartbeat. You don't know what this means to me, she whispered. I think I do, I said. It means you'll never have to choose between helping someone else and keeping yourself afloat. You can do both. We spent the rest of the afternoon in her tiny backyard, drinking iced tea and talking about everything except money. She told me about her dream of visiting Ireland, about the old stone cottage her grandmother grew up in. She'd always wanted to see it, but had put it off for someday. Well, I said someday just moved up the calendar. Her smile was pure light. Driving home, I realized I'd crossed an invisible line. My lottery win wasn't just a secret to protect. It was a tool. One I could use to shape my life on my terms, to lift up the people who mattered and quietly distance myself from the ones who didn't. But I still had unfinished business. 8 names on my list had failed the test, and while I wasn't planning revenge, I also wasn't going to pretend things could go back to how they were. I needed a clean break, something symbolic. And I knew exactly how to make it happen: one family gathering, one carefully chosen moment, and a single announcement that would close this chapter for good. They wouldn't see it as closure, but I would. The idea came to me while I was folding laundry, a task so ordinary it almost felt like the perfect place for a little plotting. If I was going to draw a line in the sand with my family, I wanted it to be clean, quiet, and impossible to misinterpret. No screaming matches, no guilt trips, just a moment so clear that no one could pretend not to understand. I decided it would happen at the next family dinner. Emily had already invited everyone over for her annual pre-holiday gathering, the one where she showed off her seasonal decor and her ability to coordinate a tablescape worthy of a magazine spread. She loved having the spotlight. This time I planned to use it. The week before, I called each family member to confirm I'd be there. The conversations were light, almost too light, as if none of them remembered the desperate calls I'd made just weeks before. Or maybe they remembered all too well and wanted to skate past it. Either way, I played along. In the days leading up to the dinner, I rehearsed exactly what I'd say. No direct accusations, no shaming, just facts wrapped in courtesy with a single sentence that would say everything without me having to explain. When the evening came, Emily's house looked like something out of a catalog: candles, flickering, the smell of rosemary and garlic, drifting from the kitchen, jazz playing softly in the background. I arrived with a bottle of wine and the same polite smile I'd worn for years. The table was set for 12, the silverware gleaming under the warm light. As we sat down, there was the usual small talk: work updates, vacation plans, petty gossip. I noticed how easily they spoke to me now, as if my supposed financial crisis had never happened. Halfway through dinner, I tapped my glass lightly. "I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for being here tonight," I began. "Family gatherings like this mean more to me than you know." A few heads nodded, forks paused midair. "I've been thinking a lot lately about who I want in my life and how I want to move forward." I continued, keeping my tone even. "And I realized something important. The people who stand by you when you have nothing are the ones you should stand by when you have everything." The words landed like a pebble dropped into a still pond, small at first, but the ripples reached every face at the table. Emily shifted in her seat. My father frowned slightly. Evelyn's fork clinked against her plate. I smiled, letting the silence hang just a second longer than comfortable. "So from here on out, I'm making some changes. I won't be at every holiday, and I won't always be available for favors or financial help. I'm focusing my time and energy on the relationships that have proven themselves. Quality over quantity." No one said a word. In the quiet, I could almost hear the unspoken questions. Is she talking about me? Does she know I didn't help her? I took a sip of wine, still smiling. I'm grateful for the lessons this year has taught me, and I wish all of you the best, truly. Emily tried to laugh it off, clinking her glass against mine. Well, cheers to that, I guess. But her eyes, like the others, betrayed a flicker of unease. They didn't know exactly what I meant, but they knew enough. I didn't linger after dessert. As I gathered my coat, Aunt June caught my eye from across the table. She gave me a small, proud nod. She understood. Driving home, the night felt lighter than I'd expected. I hadn't exposed my lottery win. I hadn't demanded apologies. But I'd made it clear the balance had shifted. And from this point forward, I was the one choosing who had a seat at my table, not the other way around. I thought the dinner would be the end of it, that my quiet announcement would draw the line I needed and let me walk away with some peace. But as I drove home that night, a different thought crept in, uninvited but persistent. They still didn't know, not the whole truth, not the test I'd set, not the reality of what I now had in my possession. And maybe part of me wanted them to. It wasn't about revenge, at least that's what I told myself. It was about closure, the kind that comes when the curtain gets pulled back and everyone finally sees the stage for what it is. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee, flipping open my notebook, the same one I'd used to make the list. I traced over each name, each note from the calls. No promises, lecture only, tight month, canceled last minute. The words looked even smaller now, almost petty in the shadow of what had really happened. I found myself wondering if they had known I had millions in the bank. Would they have treated me differently? Would they have scrambled to help out of sudden generosity? Or would they have come at me with open hands and new expectations? That question stuck in my head, looping like a song. By noon, I'd decided to find out, not directly, not with cash, but with an invitation they couldn't resist. I pulled out my phone and started drafting the text. I'm planning something special for the family. A weekend trip, all expenses paid, details to come. Within minutes, replies started rolling in. Emily sent a string of exclamation points. My father wrote, "Sounds interesting. What's the occasion?" Even Tom, who rarely bothered to respond to group messages, chimed in with "Count us in." I didn't give them the details yet, that was the point. I wanted the suspense. I wanted them thinking about it, talking about it, wondering if they were finally about to benefit from me for once. But here's the part I didn't tell them: the special weekend wasn't just a getaway. It was another test, one they wouldn't see coming until they were already in the middle of it. Because if my first test had shown me who they were in private, this one was going to show me who they were in public, with something they thought they wanted dangling right in front of them. June called me later that day, her voice cautious. "Lauren, what are you planning?" I smiled into the phone. "Just something I think will be revealing." She chuckled. "Revealing for them or for you?" "Both," I said, and I meant it. Before we hung up, she gave me one last reminder. "Whatever you do, keep your dignity. Don't let their behavior drag you down to their level." That night, I lay in bed, the pieces clicking into place. The location, the timing, the little twist at the end that would leave them stunned and speechless. And here's where I'll leave you for now. Because what I had planned for that weekend wasn't just a trip. It was the kind of moment that changes how people look at you forever. They thought they were coming for a vacation. What they didn't know was that they were walking straight into the final chapter of my experiment. 2 weeks later, the special weekend arrived. I'd booked a lakeside lodge in Vermont, a place that looked like something out of a travel magazine, all timber beams and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the water. Every room had a view, and every detail was designed to impress. They all showed up on Friday afternoon, luggage in hand, smiles wide and a little too bright. Emily was the first through the door, pulling me into a hug that lingered just a second longer than usual. "This place is gorgeous, Lauren. You really went all out." My father nodded approvingly as he surveyed the main room. "Very generous of you," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes scanning for clues. Over the next hour, everyone settled into their rooms. I'd deliberately given Aunt June the suite with the best view and the biggest balcony. The others got perfectly nice accommodations, but nothing that compared. I caught Emily noticing. I also caught the quick flash of irritation she tried to hide. Dinner that night was catered 3 courses, fine wine the works. Conversation was easy at first, but underneath the laughter I could feel the undercurrent. They were waiting for me to explain why we were here, waiting for the big reveal. I didn't give it to them, not yet. Instead, I spent Saturday morning taking them on a hike around the lake. It was peaceful, the air crisp with early autumn leaves just beginning to turn. People laughed, took pictures. But when we stopped for lunch at a small cafe, I noticed how quickly the questions began. So Tom said, leaning back in his chair, "Is this some kind of celebration promotion at work?" I smiled. "Something like that." Emily jumped in, "Or maybe a big personal milestone, new house engagement." I just sipped my coffee. "You'll find out tomorrow." That answer didn't satisfy them, but it kept them curious. And curiosity was exactly what I needed. That evening we had a bonfire by the water. Marshmallows, hot cider, the smell of wood smoke curling into the night sky. It should have been perfect, except for the way certain people couldn't stop circling back to money. My father made an offhand remark about investment opportunities. Emily brought up a friend who just started a luxury events business and was looking for partners. Even Kyle, who'd barely texted me during my fake crisis, mentioned how tight things had been lately and how a little help could get him back on track. I listened, nodding politely all the while, feeling June's eyes on me from across the fire. She knew exactly what was happening. She also knew I wasn't biting. The next morning was the moment I'd been waiting for. I called everyone into the lodge's great room after breakfast. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching the ripples on the lake outside. "I'm glad you all came this weekend," I began. "It's been nice, hasn't it? Good food, good company, beautiful surroundings." They murmured their agreement, some more genuinely than others. "I brought you here because I wanted to give something back to the people who've been there for me," I continued. "Over the past few weeks, I've learned a lot about who I can rely on, who shows up when things are hard." I paused just long enough to see the first flickers of unease cross their faces. "And tomorrow before we leave, I'll be making an announcement that will affect every single one of you." There it was, the hook, the one sentence that made their expressions shift from polite interest to barely contained anticipation. Emily leaned forward. What kind of announcement? I smiled. You'll see. Let's just say it'll be revealing. I could practically feel the speculation buzzing in the room after I walked away. They didn't know whether to be excited or nervous, but I knew one thing for sure: by tomorrow at this time they'd all know exactly where they stood with me, and there would be no going back. The morning of the reveal, the air over the lake was still almost expectant. I woke early, made coffee, and watched the mist drift over the water from the balcony. It felt like the calm before a storm, not a violent one, but the kind that shifts the air forever. By 9, everyone had gathered in the great room. Some were still in pajamas, clutching mugs. Others were dressed as if for a business meeting. Emily, of course, had her makeup done, hair curled, and a notebook in her lap. My father sat with his hands clasped, posture military straight. Aunt June was the only one who looked truly relaxed, cross-legged in an armchair with a blanket around her shoulders. I stood near the fireplace, letting the morning light stream in behind me. I promised you all an announcement, I began, so here it is. The room went quiet. 3 weeks ago, I found myself wondering who in my life I could truly depend on. Not in the easy times, but in the hard ones, the times when you're backed into a corner and need someone to step forward without hesitation. I took a breath, met each pair of eyes in turn. So I made a phone call. Actually, I made 10, to every single one of you in this room. A ripple of confusion passed over a few faces. Others, like my father's, stayed carefully neutral. I told each of you the same thing: that I'd lost my job, that I was behind on rent, that I needed help. The details varied a little, but the heart of the story was the same. And I waited to see who would step up. Emily shifted in her chair. Lauren, I raised a hand. Let me finish. Out of 10 calls, 8 of you turned me down. Some politely, some with excuses, some with advice I didn't ask for. Only one person I turned toward, June, offered to help without hesitation. She gave me nearly everything she had, not knowing if she'd ever get it back. The silence deepened. That weekend, I learned more about this family than I had in years. I learned that loyalty isn't about blood, it's about action. And I learned exactly who I want by my side going forward. Emily's voice was tight. So, what is this, some kind of public shaming? I smiled, calm. No. This is clarity. And clarity is a gift for me and for all of you. Because now you know exactly where you stand with me, and I know where I stand with you. My father leaned forward. Lauren, if you'd been honest about the situation. I cut in. Honest enough for the purposes of the test. You didn't fail because you couldn't afford to help. You failed because you chose not to, even when you could. Aunt June looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. This wasn't about embarrassing her. I'm not asking for apologies, I continued. And I'm not looking for explanations. I just wanted you to know the truth. This weekend wasn't about a celebration. It was about giving myself closure. Emily crossed her arms. So what now? You cut everyone off except June. I let the question hang in the air before answering. I'm focusing my time, my resources, and my trust on people who've proven they deserve it. That list is short, very short. I could feel the sting land. A few looked down. Others stared at me, maybe hoping I'd soften the blow. I didn't. Finally, I turned to June. You've taught me that generosity isn't about how much you give. It's about how much it costs you to give it. And you've given me more than I can ever repay. For a long moment, no one moved. Then I set my coffee cup down. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for coming. I walked out onto the deck, leaving them in the great room with their thoughts, their discomfort, and maybe the first seeds of self-reflection. What they didn't know, what none of them except June knew, was that the test hadn't just been about them. It had been about me, too. And I'd passed my own test by finally drawing the line. I stayed outside on the deck for a while, letting the cool Vermont air fill my lungs. The lake was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the changing leaves, as if even nature was holding its breath. Behind me, through the glass, I could see the family still seated, their voices low, their expressions tight. Eventually, the sliding door opened. June stepped out, her blanket draped around her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, watching the sunlight dance on the water. You handled that better than I would have, she said finally. I smiled faintly. It wasn't about blowing up at them. It was about making it impossible for them to rewrite the story later. She nodded. You think they'll get it? I think the ones who are capable of getting it will, I said. The rest will probably tell themselves a version where I'm the villain. But that's okay. I'm not in the business of fixing their narratives anymore. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then I turned to her. You know, June, this weekend was as much for you as it was for me. I wanted you to see that your kindness didn't go unnoticed, that it had weight, that it mattered. Her eyes softened. You've already done more for me than I ever expected, but you didn't have to prove anything. I did, I said quietly for myself. We spent the rest of the day in that same rhythm, long walks, easy conversation, moments of laughter that felt lighter now that the air had been cleared. The others, meanwhile, kept their distance. A few tried awkward small talk at lunch, but I didn't make it easy. I'd said what I needed to say. There was nothing left to negotiate. That evening, after everyone had packed and the cars were pulling away, I stood at the edge of the driveway with June. Emily's SUV rolled past her wave, tight and perfunctory. My father gave a stiff nod. Tom didn't even look out the window. When the last car disappeared down the road, June let out a breath. So, now what? I smiled. Now I go home, pour myself a glass of wine, and start planning the next chapter. A chapter that doesn't include anyone who failed the simplest test of human decency. She gave a small, knowing smile. Sounds like a good plan. As we hugged goodbye, I realized something. I wasn't leaving Vermont with regret. I was leaving with clarity. My circle was smaller now, but it was stronger, safer, and free of the rot I'd pretended not to see for too long. When I got back to my place that night, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. On the screen was my YouTube channel, still small but steadily growing. I clicked record and looked straight into the camera. I want to tell you a story I began. About what happens when you stop asking who's supposed to be there for you and start finding out who actually is. And if you've ever wondered what would happen if you tested the people closest to you, you're going to want to hear this. I leaned in slightly, voice dropping just enough to pull the listener closer. And when you're done with this video, don't stop here. Go watch my next one where I tell you about the time someone I trusted most nearly cost me everything. Because that story makes this one look like a warm-up. That was my final line for the day. The chapter was over, but my story wasn't done. And neither was I. Back home, the quiet felt different. Not heavy, not lonely, just peaceful. I made tea curled up in my favorite chair by the window and let the late afternoon light spill across the room. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't replaying arguments in my head or drafting imaginary speeches I'd never give. The weekend in Vermont hadn't magically fixed my family, and it hadn't erased the sting of their choices. But it had given me something I hadn't realized I was craving: freedom. Freedom from the weight of wondering would they be there if I needed them. Freedom from trying to earn loyalty that was never truly offered. And with that freedom came space. Space to fill my life with people who showed up without being asked. Space to invest in kindness without keeping a ledger. Space to dream without worrying who might try to tear those dreams down. I thought of June, her laugh, her stubbornness, her way of making you feel like you belonged even when you didn't think you did. People like her were rare, and I wasn't going to waste another minute taking that for granted. The truth is, not every ending has to be a war. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back, let the dust settle, and walk away with your head high. You don't need to slam the door, you just need to make sure it's closed. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft gold, I realized something simple but profound. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The noise was behind me. The path ahead was mine alone, and that in itself was enough.